Under the scorching midday sun, a black SUV speeds down an empty desert road. Behind the wheel, a well-dressed man drives in silence, veering onto an unmarked path. Beside him, his mother, frail and confused by dementia, stares at the barren landscape. Without a word, the son stops the car in an isolated spot and opens the door. In the back, a German shepherd lifts its head, watching the man's every move. The son quickly grabs his mother's suitcase and returns alone to the vehicle. The engine roars, dust rises, leaving the elderly woman motionless under the relentless sun. And as the car disappears over the horizon, the desert holds its breath. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt ribbon that cut through the endless expanse of red rock and sagebrush. Inside the black Mercedes sedan, the air conditioning hummed steadily, but it couldn't cool the tension that filled the vehicle like an unwelcome passenger. Margaret Wheeler sat in the passenger seat, her once proud silver hair now thin and disheveled, her blue eyes clouded with the fog of dementia that had slowly stolen pieces of her sharp mind over the past 2 years. At 78, she had been a formidable woman, a pillar of Phoenix society, known for her charitable work and keen business sense that had helped build the Wheeler family fortune. Now, she clutched a faded photograph of her late husband, Robert, occasionally speaking to it as if he could hear her. "Robert, dear, are we almost there?" she asked, her voice carrying the uncertain tremor that had become increasingly common. "This seems like such a long way to the clinic." Behind the wheel, her son, Michael Wheeler, kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. At 52, Michael was the picture of corporate success, perfectly styled dark hair with distinguished gray at the temples, an expensive suit that fit like it was carved for his frame, and hands that had never known manual labor. Those same hands now gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "Just a little further, Mother," he replied, his voice carefully controlled but lacking the warmth that should accompany such words. The facility, they recommended this route. Less traffic, more peaceful. Margaret nodded absently, then turned to look at the massive German shepherd in the back seat. Duke, their family dog for the past 8 years, was a magnificent animal with intelligent amber eyes and a coat of black and tan that gleamed despite his advancing age. The dog had been Margaret's constant companion since Robert's passing, sleeping beside her bed and following her through the sprawling Wheeler mansion with unwavering devotion. Duke sensed something was wrong. His ears were pinned back, and he panted heavily despite the cool air in the car. Every few minutes, he would whine softly and place his large paws on the window, as if trying to remember landmarks, or perhaps sensing a destination that didn't match the story being told. "But Duke seems restless," Margaret observed, reaching back to stroke the dog's massive head. "You're a good boy, aren't you? You'll like the new place. Michael says they have gardens where you can run." Michael's reflection in the rearview mirror betrayed a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, or calculation. He had told her the facility allowed pets, one of many carefully constructed lies that had made this journey possible. In reality, he had no idea what would happen to the dog. That was a problem for later, after he'd solved the more pressing issue of his mother's increasingly public episodes. The Mercedes turned off the main highway onto a smaller road that seemed to lead nowhere. Red rock formations rose like ancient sentinels on either side, and the landscape became more desolate with each passing mile. Margaret, lost in a memory, began humming an old song her mother used to sing to her. The sound filled the car with a haunting melody that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. "Michael, I don't remember this road," she said suddenly, her voice gaining a clarity that surprised him. These moments of lucidity were becoming rarer, but when they came, they were sharp as broken glass. "When your father and I visited that clinic in Scottsdale last year, we didn't go this way." "Different clinic, Mother," Michael said quickly, adjusting his tie with one hand while steering with the other. "This one comes highly recommended. Very private, very discreet. You'll be comfortable there." The word discreet hung in the air like smoke. Margaret caught it, but couldn't quite grasp its significance through the haze of her condition. In the back seat, Duke whimpered again and began pawing at the door handle, his anxiety growing with each mile they traveled away from anything resembling civilization. Michael's phone buzzed on the dashboard, a text from his business partner, Harrison Blackwood. The message was brief. "Board meeting moved to tomorrow. Need clean slate before Goldman presentation. Handle your situation." Michael's stomach tightened. The Goldman Sachs presentation was the biggest opportunity of his career, a chance to take Wheeler Enterprises from regional success to national prominence. But his mother's condition had become a liability. Her appearances at company events had grown increasingly embarrassing, and last month's incident at the charity gala, where she had loudly accused the mayor's wife of stealing her purse, which had actually been sitting in Margaret's own lap, had been the final straw. The Mercedes crested a small hill, and the road ahead stretched endlessly into the desert. No buildings, no signs of civilization, just endless red earth and blue sky. Margaret frowned, her maternal instincts cutting through the fog of dementia like a lighthouse beam through storm clouds. "Michael, where exactly is this clinic?" she asked. And for a moment, her voice carried the authority of the woman who had once run board meetings and charity committees with iron efficiency. "Not much further now," he repeated, but his voice had grown mechanical, rehearsed. He glanced at his Rolex, an expensive piece that had been a gift from his mother for his 50th birthday. In 2 hours, he could be back in Phoenix, telling concerned friends and business associates that his mother was resting comfortably in a private facility where she was receiving the best possible care. Duke suddenly barked, a sharp, urgent sound that made Margaret jump. The dog had never been aggressive, but there was something in that bark that spoke of alarm, of a primal understanding that something was terribly wrong. He began pacing across the back seat, from window to window, his claws clicking on the leather upholstery. "Settle down, Duke," Michael snapped, his carefully maintained composure cracking slightly. "We're almost there." But even as he said it, Michael was looking for the right spot, isolated enough that no one would find her quickly, but not so remote that... He stopped that line of thinking. This was temporary, he told himself, just until the Goldman presentation was over, until the company stock price stabilized, until he could figure out a more permanent solution. His mother would be fine. People survived in the desert all the time. There were ranch houses out here, weren't there? Someone would find her and take her to a real clinic. His hands were clean. Margaret was humming again, the same melody from her childhood, but now it seemed to be calling to something ancient in the desert air. Duke's ears perked up, and he stopped pacing to listen, his head tilted in the way dogs do when they hear something beyond human perception. The road ahead shimmered in the heat, and in that shimmer the fate of 3 lives, an elderly woman losing her memories, her son losing his humanity, and a loyal dog about to discover the true meaning of devotion, hung in the balance like a mirage that might disappear with the next mile marker. The Mercedes rolled to a stop beside a weathered metal sign that read, "Painted Desert Vista Point, 2 miles." The lettering was faded, and bullet holes had turned the metal into a piece of accidental art. Michael turned off the engine, and suddenly the silence of the desert rushed in like a living thing, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and Duke's continued panting. "Why are we stopping, dear?" Margaret asked, blinking in the sudden quiet. "Is this the clinic?" Michael didn't answer immediately. He stared through the windshield at the vast emptiness ahead, red rock mesas, scattered Joshua trees, and a horizon that seemed to go on forever. A dust devil danced in the distance, spinning sand and debris in a hypnotic spiral before dissolving into nothing. The temperature gauge on the dashboard read 108 degrees Fahrenheit. "Engine trouble," he said finally, his voice hollow. "I need to check something under the hood." He stepped out of the air-conditioned sanctuary into the furnace of the desert afternoon. The heat hit him like a physical blow, and within seconds, his expensive shirt was damp with perspiration. He walked around to the front of the car, raised the hood, and pretended to examine the engine while his mind raced. This was it, the point of no return. Everything he had worked for, everything his family had built, hung in the balance. The Goldman Sachs deal would put Wheeler Enterprises on the map nationally, maybe internationally. But his mother's condition was getting worse, not better. Last week, she had wandered out of the house in her nightgown and been found 3 blocks away, asking strangers to help her find her little boy Michael, who was supposed to be home from school by now. The neighbors were starting to talk. The staff at the country club whispered behind their hands. The business community was beginning to question his judgment, his stability, his fitness to lead a major corporation. Inside the car, Margaret was growing agitated. "Michael, is everything all right?" She tried to open her door, but the child's safety locks Michael had engaged that morning held firm. "Michael!" Duke sensed her distress and began whining, pawing at the door handle with increasing desperation. The German Shepherd's training had taught him to protect Margaret above all else, and every instinct was telling him that something was wrong. Michael slammed the hood shut and walked to Margaret's door. When he opened it, the heat rushed in like an oven blast, and she recoiled instinctively. "Come on, Mother," he said, extending his hand. "Let's get some fresh air, stretch our legs." "In this heat?" Margaret looked at him as if he'd suggested walking on the sun. "Michael, I think you're having a heat stroke. Let's go to the clinic now. They'll have something cold to drink." "Just for a minute," he insisted, helping her out of the car. Her legs were unsteady, and she leaned heavily on his arm. "There's supposed to be a beautiful view from here. Remember how you and Dad used to love scenic overlooks?" Duke immediately jumped out after her, his protective instincts in overdrive. He circled around Margaret, positioning himself between her and the empty desert, his nose working furiously to process the alien sense of this place. Margaret took a few tentative steps, her hand shading her eyes against the blazing sun. "It's very empty, isn't it?" she said, a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Where is everyone? Where are the other families visiting the clinic?" "They use the other entrance," Michael said, backing slowly toward the car. "More private that way." It was then that Margaret noticed the suitcase. Michael had pulled it from the trunk, a small overnight bag that contained some of her medications, a change of clothes, and importantly, all of her identification documents, insurance cards, and emergency contact information, everything someone would need to get help or prove who they were. "Why do you have my suitcase out here?" she asked. And for a moment, the fog lifted completely from her mind. She looked at her son with the sharp intelligence that had once made her one of Phoenix's most respected businesswomen. Michael Robert Wheeler. What is going on? The use of his full name, the tone their mother had used when he was caught in childhood mischief, nearly broke his resolve. For just an instant, he saw himself through her eyes. A successful man, abandoning his sick mother in the desert because her illness was inconvenient to his ambitions. "Mother, he began, but his phone buzzed again. Another text from Harrison. "Reporters asking questions about Margaret's health situation. Need containment strategy ASAP." The reminder of what was at stake hardened his resolve. He looked at Margaret, standing small and confused in the vastness of the desert, Duke pressing protectively against her legs, and he made his choice. "Someone will come for you," he said quietly, setting the suitcase down beside her. "This is just temporary, just until I can sort things out." "Michael?" Margaret's voice was small now, frightened. "What do you mean someone will come? Come from where?" But Michael was already walking back to the Mercedes, his steps quick and purposeful. Duke realized what was happening before Margaret did. The dog's protective instincts flared into action, and he bounded after Michael, barking frantically and positioning himself between the man and the car. "Move, Duke!" Michael shouted, but the German shepherd stood his ground, his lips pulled back in a warning snarl that would have impressed his police dog ancestors. Margaret finally understood. The isolation, the lies about the clinic, the suitcase. It all crystallized in her mind with terrifying clarity. "Michael, you can't leave me here. I'm sick. I need help." "Someone will find you," he said again, this time louder, as if saying it with more volume would make it true. "There are ranger stations out here, other travelers. You'll be fine." He managed to get around Duke and into the driver's seat, but the dog immediately jumped up, placing his massive paws on the driver's side window, barking with increasing desperation. Margaret was running toward the car now, her steps unsteady but driven by panic. "Michael, please! I don't understand. What did I do wrong?" Tears were streaming down her face, cutting channels through the dust that had already begun to settle on her skin. Michael couldn't look at her. He started the engine, and the sound seemed to echo off the canyon walls like thunder. Duke was still at the window, his claws scratching against the glass, his barks becoming howls of distress. The Mercedes began to move, and Duke made a decision that would change everything. Instead of watching helplessly as the car pulled away, the German shepherd leapt down and began running alongside it, keeping pace despite the increasing speed. His powerful legs carried him effortlessly across the desert floor, his attention focused entirely on the vehicle carrying away the man who had betrayed the woman Duke was born to protect. Michael watched in his rearview mirror as his mother grew smaller and smaller, a lonely figure standing beside a suitcase in the middle of nowhere. Duke was still running, a black and tan blur against the red landscape, refusing to give up even as the car's speed made pursuit impossible. Finally, after nearly a mile, Duke stopped running. He stood panting in the middle of the road, watching the Mercedes disappear into the heat shimmer. For a long moment, he remained motionless, processing what had just happened. Then, with the kind of decision that speaks to the deepest bonds between human and animal, Duke turned around and began the long run back to Margaret. Behind the wheel of the speeding Mercedes, Michael told himself he had done what was necessary. The business had to come first. His mother would understand. Eventually, someone would find her within hours, maybe minutes. She would be taken to a real clinic, properly cared for, and he could visit her once the Goldman deal was secured. But even as he rehearsed these justifications, he couldn't shake the image of Duke's amber eyes staring at him through the window, or the sound of his mother calling his name across the desert silence. The air conditioning couldn't touch the cold that was spreading through his chest, and the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly toward a horizon he was no longer sure he wanted to reach. Margaret Wheeler stood motionless beside her suitcase for nearly an hour after the Mercedes disappeared, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, and already her fair skin was beginning to redden despite the lightweight cardigan she wore. The silence was overwhelming. No traffic, no voices, no sounds of civilization. Just the whisper of wind through the sparse vegetation and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. When Duke finally returned, running hard across the desert floor with his tongue lolling and his coat dusty, Margaret felt a surge of relief so powerful it nearly knocked her over. She dropped to her knees as the German shepherd reached her, wrapping her arms around his massive neck and burying her face in his warm fur. "Oh, Duke," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What are we going to do? Why did Michael leave us here?" Duke pressed against her, his amber eyes scanning the horizon with the focused intensity of a soldier on watch. He had appointed himself her guardian, and every fiber of his being was now dedicated to keeping her safe. His nose worked constantly, cataloging scents and searching for any sign of water or shelter in this hostile environment. As the afternoon wore on, Margaret's confusion deepened. Sometimes she remembered clearly what had happened: Michael's betrayal, the lies about the clinic, the terrible realization that her own son had abandoned her. Other times, the dementia fog rolled in, and she would look around in bewilderment, wondering why she was standing in the desert with a suitcase, waiting for someone to come get her for what she was sure was an important appointment. "Duke, do you know where we are?" she asked during one of her lucid moments. "I think we missed our turns somewhere." The German shepherd whined softly and nudged her toward a cluster of rocks that would provide some shade. His instincts told him they needed to conserve energy and find water soon. The desert was unforgiving, and he could sense that Margaret was already struggling with the heat and dehydration. They made their way slowly to the rock formation, Margaret leaning heavily on Duke's sturdy frame. Her legs were shaking, partly from the heat and partly from the shock of her situation. She settled into the meager shade, and Duke immediately positioned himself between her and the open desert, his ears constantly swiveling to catch any sound that might indicate approaching help or danger. As evening approached, the temperature began to drop, but Margaret was shivering now, not from cold, but from the onset of mild heat exhaustion. She had drunk the small bottle of water from her purse hours ago, and her lips were already beginning to crack. Duke had found no water source, despite several scouting expeditions, and his own thirst was becoming desperate. "I don't understand," Margaret said, her voice weak but clear. "Michael said someone would come. Where is everyone? Where are the doctors who are supposed to help me?" Duke stood and began pacing, his protective instincts warring with his need to find water. Finally, he made a decision. Gently grasping Margaret's sleeve in his teeth, he began pulling her to her feet. When she looked at him questioningly, he walked a few steps away from the rocks, then returned, repeating the gesture until she understood. "You want us to walk?" she asked. "But Duke, I'm so tired, and it's getting dark." The German shepherd whined insistently and nudged her again. His nose had caught something, not water, but the faint scent of wood smoke, so subtle that only his keen senses could detect it. Somewhere in the distance, there was human activity. Margaret struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. "All right, boy, if you think we should go, then we'll go. You're smarter than I am right now." They began walking across the desert floor, Margaret carrying her light suitcase and leaning on Duke whenever the rocky terrain threatened to trip her. The dog led with purpose, his nose to the ground, following the almost imperceptible scent trail. As darkness fell, the desert came alive with sounds, coyotes calling in the distance, the rustle of small animals moving through the brush, the soft hoot of an owl beginning its nightly hunt. After what felt like hours but was probably only one, Duke suddenly stopped and raised his head, his ears pricked forward. Margaret followed his gaze and saw it, a tiny flicker of light in the distance, barely visible against the star-filled sky. "A fire," she breathed, her voice filled with hope. "Duke, there's someone out there." They pressed on toward the light, Duke supporting Margaret as she stumbled over rocks and through sandy washes. Her breathing was labored now, and she stopped frequently to rest. But the sight of that distant flame kept her moving forward. The fire belonged to Jake Martinez, a freelance photographer who made his living capturing the beauty of America's remote places. He was a solitary man in his 40s, weathered by years of outdoor work, with kind eyes and hands that were steady, whether holding a camera or building a campfire. He had been documenting the changing light in this particular section of desert for 3 days, camping rough and living off the supplies in his well-equipped pickup truck. When he heard Duke's bark echoing across the desert, Jake looked up from his evening meal with surprise. Visitors were rare out here, and the sound had come from the direction where no roads existed. He stood and peered into the darkness, his hand instinctively moving to the flashlight clipped to his belt. "Hello," he called out. "Is someone there?" Margaret's voice came back, weak but clear. "Please, we need help." Jake grabbed his flashlight and jogged toward the sound, his beam cutting through the darkness. What he found made him stop in his tracks. An elderly woman in expensive but disheveled clothes, accompanied by a magnificent German shepherd who was clearly exhausted but still alert and protective. "Ma'am, what are you doing out here?" Jake asked, immediately moving to support Margaret as she swayed on her feet. "Are you lost? Is there an accident?" I don't know," Margaret said, her confusion evident. "My son. He said we were going to a clinic, but then he left us here. I don't understand why." Duke watched Jake carefully, his protective instincts still engaged, but something in the man's gentle manner and genuine concern seemed to earn the dog's cautious approval. When Jake helped Margaret toward his campfire, Duke followed closely, ready to intervene if necessary. Jake settled Margaret in his camp chair and immediately began checking her for signs of serious dehydration or heat stroke. Her pulse was rapid, her skin was flushed, and she was clearly disoriented, but she seemed stable for the moment. He gave her small sips of water from his canteen and covered her with a lightweight blanket as the desert night grew cold. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked gently. "Margaret Wheeler," she replied, and then looked around in confusion. "But I think I might be lost. This doesn't look like Phoenix." Jake's eyebrows rose. The Wheeler name was well known in Arizona business circles. He had even photographed one of their corporate events a few years ago, something about a charity golf tournament. But what was Margaret Wheeler doing alone in the desert with only a dog for company? "Mrs. Wheeler, how did you get here? Do you have a car nearby?" Margaret's face crumpled as the memory came flooding back with crystal clarity. "Michael brought me here. My son. He said someone would come for me, but no one came. Only Duke stayed with me." At the sound of his name, Duke moved closer to Margaret, resting his large head on her knee. Jake could see the devotion in the dog's eyes, the unwavering loyalty that had brought them through the desert alive. "Mrs. Wheeler, I need to get you to a hospital," Jake said carefully. "You're dehydrated and you need medical attention. But first, can you tell me anything else about how you got here? Any landmarks you remember?" But Margaret was fading now. The combination of exhaustion, dehydration, and emotional trauma taking its toll. Her eyes closed, and her breathing became deep and regular as she fell into the sleep her body desperately needed. Jake covered her more carefully and turned his attention to Duke, who had not relaxed his vigilance despite the apparent safety of the camp. The dog's amber eyes met his, and Jake saw intelligence there, and something else, a desperate need to communicate something important. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked softly. "What happened out there? What's the real story here?" Duke whined softly and looked toward Margaret, then back at Jake, as if trying to convey the urgency of their situation. Jake had spent enough time with animals to recognize when one was trying to tell him something crucial, but he couldn't interpret the message. What Jake didn't know was that Margaret Wheeler's disappearance had already been reported to the authorities by concerned neighbors, and that her son Michael was at that very moment in his Phoenix office, crafting a story about his mother's voluntary admission to a private care facility. The wheels of a much larger drama were already in motion, and Jake Martinez, through simple human compassion, had just become a key player in a story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, loyalty, and the lengths people would go to protect their secrets. Dawn broke over the desert in shades of pink and gold, painting the landscape in colors that would have taken Jake's breath away under normal circumstances. But this morning, his attention was focused entirely on his unexpected guests. Margaret had slept fitfully through the night, murmuring in her sleep about appointments and missing papers, while Duke maintained his silent vigil beside her. Jake had been awake since before sunrise, his mind racing with questions about the situation he'd stumbled into. Margaret Wheeler's presence in the desert made no sense, and her son's alleged abandonment seemed beyond belief. Yet the evidence was right in front of him: an elderly woman with dementia, alone in one of America's most unforgiving environments, with only a loyal dog for protection. "Mrs. Wheeler," Jake said softly as Margaret stirred. "How are you feeling this morning?" Margaret opened her eyes, blinking in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, panic flickered across her face. But then she saw Duke beside her and seemed to remember where she was. "Better, thank you," she said, accepting the cup of coffee Jake offered. "You're very kind, Mr. Martinez." "Jake Martinez. I'm a photographer." "Martinez," Margaret repeated, and suddenly her face brightened with recognition. "Oh, you photographed our charity event 2 years ago, the Children's Hospital fundraiser. You did such beautiful work." Jake was surprised that she remembered, given her condition. "That's right. Your foundation raised over $2 million that night." "Did we?" Margaret smiled, but then her expression clouded. "I don't remember very much anymore. That's why Michael said I needed to go to the clinic. But then..." She trailed off, looking around the desert campsite with growing confusion. Jake's photographer instincts, honed by years of reading people and situations, told him there was much more to this story. He made a decision that would prove fateful for everyone involved. "Mrs. Wheeler, I'm going to drive you to Flagstaff. There's an excellent medical center there, and they can make sure you're properly taken care of. But first, could you show me exactly where your son left you yesterday?" With Duke leading the way, they retraced the path back to the roadside where Margaret had been abandoned. In the clear morning light, Jake could see the tire tracks where the Mercedes had stopped, and more telling, where it had accelerated away quickly, leaving deeper impressions in the sand. Duke began pacing around the area, his nose to the ground, following scent trails that only he could detect. Suddenly, he stopped at a particular spot and began digging, his powerful paws sending sand flying. "What is it, boy?" Margaret asked, her voice carrying a note of the authority she'd once commanded in boardrooms. Duke's digging revealed something that made Jake's blood run cold: a cell phone, deliberately buried in the sand. Jake carefully extracted it, recognizing it as an expensive model. When he pressed the power button, it came to life, showing a wallpaper photo of Margaret and Duke in what appeared to be the garden of a beautiful home. "This is my phone," Margaret said, staring at it in bewilderment. "But how did it get buried here? I thought I lost it somewhere." Jake's jaw tightened as the implications hit him. Michael Wheeler hadn't just abandoned his mother. He had deliberately sabotaged her ability to call for help. This wasn't a moment of panic or poor judgment. It was calculated and cruel. "Mrs. Wheeler, we need to get you to safety immediately," Jake said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "And then I think there are some people who need to hear your story." As they drove toward Flagstaff in Jake's pickup truck, with Margaret and Duke in the passenger seat, Jake's mind was already working through the implications of what he'd discovered. Margaret Wheeler wasn't just a lost elderly woman. She was the victim of what could only be described as deliberate endangerment. Meanwhile, back in Phoenix, investigative journalist Sarah Chen was starting her day with her usual routine: coffee, newspaper, and a review of tips that had come in through her secure email. Sarah had built her reputation by exposing corporate corruption and family scandals among Arizona's elite, and her instincts were finely tuned to detect when something was being covered up. The tip that caught her attention was anonymous but specific. Look into Margaret Wheeler's sudden admission to a private care facility. Her son's company has a board meeting today that could change everything. Something doesn't add up. Sarah knew the Wheeler name well. Michael Wheeler had been positioning himself as a rising star in Arizona business, and Wheeler Enterprises was rumored to be in talks with major national investors. But she also knew that Margaret Wheeler had been a prominent figure in Phoenix society for decades, known for her sharp mind and charitable work. The idea that such a woman would suddenly disappear into a private facility without any public explanation struck Sarah as suspicious. She began making calls, starting with contacts at local hospitals and care facilities. None of them had any record of Margaret Wheeler being admitted. Next, she called the Wheeler Enterprises corporate office, asking to speak with Margaret about a potential story on her philanthropic work. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said, her voice carefully coached. "Mrs. Wheeler is not available for interviews at this time. She's resting at a private facility and not receiving visitors." "Could you tell me which facility?" Sarah pressed. "I'd like to send flowers. I'm afraid that information is confidential for privacy reasons." Sarah's investigative instincts were now fully engaged. In her experience, legitimate medical situations didn't require this level of secrecy. She spent the rest of the morning making more calls, gradually building a picture of a family that was working very hard to keep something quiet. It was during her lunch break that Sarah received another anonymous tip, this one more disturbing than the first. "Margaret Wheeler never made it to any facility. Check the desert roads east of Phoenix. Someone needs to find her before it's too late." As Jake's truck pulled into the emergency department at Flagstaff Medical Center, Sarah was already on her way to Phoenix, following a growing trail of inconsistencies and lies. She had no idea that the two investigations, hers and Jake's rescue mission, were about to converge in ways that would expose one of the most shocking family betrayals in Arizona history. Duke seemed to sense that they were approaching safety. For the first time since the abandonment, the German Shepherd relaxed slightly, though his protective attention never left Margaret. As the medical staff took over Margaret's care, Duke was reluctantly separated from her, but not before Jake promised both of them that he would make sure the full truth came to light. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, the attending physician, was alarmed by Margaret's condition. Beyond the obvious dehydration and heat exposure, she showed signs of having been without her dementia medications for more than 24 hours, which could have serious consequences for her cognitive function. "How did she end up in the desert?" Dr. Rodriguez asked Jake privately. Jake chose his words carefully. According to her, she was taken there by her son and left alone. "I found her last night with just her dog for protection." Dr. Rodriguez's expression hardened. In her years of emergency medicine, she had seen enough elder abuse to recognize the signs. "We need to contact the authorities immediately. This sounds like abandonment, possibly worse." "I was hoping you'd say that," Jake replied. Because I think there's a lot more to this story than what we've seen so far." As Margaret was being treated and evaluated, Duke waited in the truck with the windows down, his amber eyes fixed on the hospital entrance. He had kept his promise to protect Margaret, bringing her to safety through sheer determination and loyalty. But the German Shepherd's instincts told him that the danger wasn't over, that the man who had betrayed Margaret once would try again if given the chance. What Duke couldn't know was that at that very moment, Michael Wheeler was sitting in a conference room in Phoenix, presenting his company's expansion plans to a room full of potential investors, acting as if nothing unusual had happened in his personal life. But Sarah Chen was already asking questions that would soon turn his carefully constructed world upside down, and Jake Martinez had evidence that could destroy Michael's reputation forever. The afternoon sun beat down on the desert where Margaret had spent the night, but the heat was nothing compared to the fire that was about to consume the lies and deceptions that had put an innocent woman's life at risk. The truth, like water in the desert, was precious and life-giving, and it was about to surface in ways that none of them could have predicted. Sarah Chen arrived at the Wheeler Enterprises building just as the Goldman Sachs presentation was concluding. She positioned herself in the lobby, watching as men in expensive suits filed out of the executive conference room, their faces animated with the kind of excitement that came with big money deals. Michael Wheeler emerged last, his smile brilliant and confident, shaking hands and making promises about future partnerships. Sarah studied him carefully. He looked like exactly what he was supposed to be, a successful businessman at the height of his powers, radiating confidence and charm. Nothing about his demeanor suggested a man who had abandoned his elderly mother in the desert less than 24 hours earlier. "Mr. Wheeler," Sarah approached him as the crowd of investors began to thin. "Sarah Chen, Arizona Tribune. I wonder if I could ask you a few questions about your mother's recent admission to a care facility." The change in Michael's expression was subtle but telling. The smile remained, but his eyes grew calculating, wary. "I'm sorry, but my mother's medical situation is private family business. I'm sure you understand." "Of course," Sarah said smoothly. "I was just hoping to get a statement for a piece I'm working on about the challenges adult children face when caring for parents with dementia. Your mother has been such an inspiration to the community over the years." "She has," Michael agreed, his voice warming slightly at what seemed like a harmless human interest angle. "It's been difficult watching her condition decline, but she's in the best possible hands now." "Which facility, if you don't mind me asking? Our readers often want to know about quality care options." Michael's hesitation was barely perceptible, but Sarah caught it. "A private facility in Scottsdale. Very exclusive, very discreet. They specialize in cases like my mother's." Sarah nodded sympathetically, while mentally noting that every care facility in Scottsdale had already told her they had no record of Margaret Wheeler. "It must be a relief to know she's getting the specialized attention she needs." "Absolutely." Michael glanced at his watch, a clear signal that the conversation was over. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another meeting." As Michael walked away, Sarah was already forming her next move. His answers had been smooth, practiced, but completely fabricated. In her years of investigative work, she had learned to read the micro-expressions that betrayed deception, and Michael Wheeler was definitely hiding something significant. Meanwhile, back in Flagstaff, Jake was dealing with the growing complexity of Margaret's situation. Dr. Rodriguez had completed her evaluation and was deeply concerned about what she'd found. "Mr. Martinez, Mrs. Wheeler, shows clear signs of having been without her medications for at least 24 hours, the doctor said privately. "Someone with her condition should never be left unsupervised, let alone abandoned in a hostile environment. What her son did, if your account is accurate, could be considered attempted abandonment, possibly worse." "What happens now?" Jake asked. "We've contacted Adult Protective Services and the police. They'll want to interview both you and Mrs. Wheeler when she's more stable. In the meantime, we're going to keep her for observation and make sure she's fully recovered." Jake nodded, then turned to Duke, who had been allowed to stay in the room, given his obvious emotional support role. "What do you think, boy? Ready to help tell the whole story?" Duke's ears perked up at Jake's tone, and the German shepherd seemed to understand that his vigil was far from over. There was still work to do. It was then that Margaret, who had been dozing lightly, suddenly sat up with unusual alertness. Her eyes were clear and focused in a way they hadn't been since Jake found her. "There was something else," she said urgently, "and something important. Duke found it." "Found what, Mrs. Wheeler?" Dr. Rodriguez asked gently. "A place, a cabin. We were walking, looking for water, and Duke led me to this old cabin." Margaret's voice gained strength as the memory became clearer. There were papers there. A diary or journal. Someone had been writing about business deals, about Michael's company, about things that weren't right. Jake and Dr. Rodriguez exchanged glances. "Mrs. Wheeler, where was this cabin? Can you remember?" "Duke knows," Margaret said with certainty. "He remembers everything. He could take us back there." Before anyone could respond, Margaret's phone, the one Duke had uncovered from its sandy grave, began ringing. Jake had charged it while Margaret was being treated, and now it showed an incoming call from Michael home. The three of them stared at the phone in silence as it rang. Finally, Jake answered it. "Margaret Wheeler's phone," he said simply. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats before Michael's voice tight with barely controlled panic, came through. "Who is this? Where's my mother?" "Your mother is safe," Jake said, his voice cold. "No thanks to you. I don't know what you're talking about. My mother is in a care facility. Who are you, and why do you have her phone?" "Jake Martinez. I'm the photographer who found your mother in the desert last night, along with her buried phone. She's in a hospital now, being treated for dehydration and exposure." The silence was longer this time. When Michael spoke again, his voice had shifted to what Jake recognized as lawyer mode: careful, controlled, preparing for damage control. "There must be some misunderstanding. My mother has dementia. She gets confused, wanders off sometimes. If she ended up in the desert, it was because she became disoriented and—" "She wasn't wandering," Jake interrupted. "She was exactly where you left her, beside the road with her suitcase, the same spot where you buried her phone to make sure she couldn't call for help." The line went dead. Jake looked at Margaret, who was listening with growing distress as the reality of her son's betrayal became undeniable. Duke moved closer to her, sensing her emotional pain and offering the only comfort he could provide: his steady, unwavering presence. "We need to find that cabin," Jake said grimly. "If there are documents there that Margaret remembers, they might explain why Michael was so desperate to hide his mother away." 3 hours later, Jake, Margaret, and Duke were back in the desert, retracing the path Margaret and Duke had taken during their night of survival. Margaret's memory of events was clearer now that she was properly hydrated and back on her medications, and Duke seemed to understand exactly what they were looking for. The German shepherd led them confidently across terrain that looked identical to Jake's untrained eye. But Duke navigated with the precision of a GPS system. After nearly an hour of walking, they crested a small rise and saw it, a weathered cabin tucked into a natural depression between two rock formations, virtually invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The cabin was old but solidly built, clearly abandoned for years, but still intact. Duke led them directly to the door, which hung slightly ajar. Inside, the air was stale but dry, and shafts of sunlight through cracked windows illuminated a space that had obviously been used as a shelter by desert travelers over the years. But in one corner, carefully wrapped in plastic and hidden under loose floorboards, Margaret found what she had remembered: a leather-bound journal filled with meticulous handwriting. Jake opened it carefully, his eyes widening as he read the first few pages. The journal belonged to Harrison Blackwood, Michael's business partner, and it detailed a series of questionable business practices, tax evasion schemes, and what appeared to be systematic fraud within Wheeler Enterprises. "This is why," Margaret said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of understanding. "This is why Michael needed me to disappear, not because I was embarrassing him, but because I might remember something, might say something that would expose what they've been doing." Jake photographed every page with his professional camera, his mind racing with the implications. The journal didn't just document financial crimes, it also revealed Michael's growing desperation to keep his mother quiet, including discussions about permanent solutions to the Margaret problem. Duke sat alertly by the cabin door, his ears constantly swiveling to monitor for any approaching vehicles. His instincts told him they were still in danger, that the man who had betrayed Margaret once would not hesitate to do so again. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stay away from things that don't concern you. Some family matters are better left private." Margaret saw the message over Jake's shoulder, and her expression hardened with a resolve that reminded him of the formidable businesswoman she had once been. "He's threatening you now," she said quietly. "My own son is threatening the man who saved my life." "Then we'd better make sure Sarah Chen gets this story before Michael can do any more damage," Jake replied, already planning their next move. What none of them knew was that Sarah was at that very moment sitting in her car outside the Wheeler mansion, watching as moving trucks loaded furniture and personal belongings into vehicles bound for destinations unknown. Michael Wheeler wasn't just trying to silence his mother. He was preparing to disappear entirely, taking his ill-gotten gains and leaving behind a trail of broken promises and abandoned responsibilities. The race to expose the truth had begun, and the stakes were higher than any of them had imagined. Sarah Chen's phone rang just as she was photographing the moving trucks outside the Wheeler mansion. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but her instinct told her to answer. And Sarah Chen. "Ms. Chen, this is Jake Martinez. I believe you've been investigating the Margaret Wheeler situation." Sarah's pulse quickened. She had been trying to track down leads all day, but they had been frustratingly elusive. "Yes, I have. How did you get my number?" "Dr. Rodriguez at Flagstaff Medical gave it to me. She said you'd been calling hospitals looking for Margaret Wheeler. Well, I found her." "Is she safe?" "She's safe now, but barely. Her son abandoned her in the desert yesterday morning, left her there with no water, no phone, no way to call for help. If it wasn't for her dog, she would have..." Jake's voice caught. Even now, thinking about what could have happened made him angry. "Where are you now?" Sarah was already starting her car. "Flagstaff Medical. But we just got back from the desert, and we found something you need to see. Documents that explain why Michael Wheeler was so desperate to get his mother out of the picture." "I'm on my way," Sarah said. "But Mr. Martinez, I think you should know. Michael Wheeler is currently loading moving trucks. It looks like he's preparing to disappear." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Jake's voice came back, grim and determined. "Then we don't have much time." As Sarah drove north toward Flagstaff, her phone buzzed with text messages. The first was from her editor. "Wheeler's story getting national attention. Whatever you've got, we need it fast." The second was from an unknown number. "Stop looking into family business that doesn't concern you. This is your only warning." Sarah smiled grimly. Threats were usually a sign that she was getting close to something important. At Flagstaff Medical, Jake was showing Margaret the photographs he'd taken of Harrison Blackwood's journal when a commotion erupted in the emergency department. Through the window, they could see a black Mercedes sedan pulling into the parking lot. The same car that had carried Margaret into the desert. "He's here," Margaret said, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "Michael found us." Duke immediately moved to the window, his hackles rising as he watched Michael Wheeler stride across the parking lot. The German shepherd's body language was unmistakable. He recognized a threat to his protected person. "Mrs. Wheeler, you don't have to see him if you don't want to," Dr. Rodriguez said firmly. "Hospital security can..." "No," Margaret interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down corporate boards and charity committees. "I want to see him. I want to look my son in the eye and ask him why he tried to leave me to die in the desert." Jake positioned himself between Margaret and the door, with Duke at his side. When Michael Wheeler entered the room, flanked by two men in expensive suits who were obviously lawyers, the tension was immediately palpable. Michael looked older than he had that morning. His perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But his voice was smooth and controlled when he spoke. "Mother, thank God you're safe. When I heard you'd wandered off from the facility, I was so worried." Margaret stared at her son for a long moment before responding. "Wandered off, Michael? Is that the story you're telling? Mother, you're confused. Your condition..." "My condition is dementia, not stupidity," Margaret said sharply. "I remember exactly what happened. You drove me to the middle of nowhere, told me someone would come for me, and left me there to die. You buried my phone so I couldn't call for help." One of the lawyers stepped forward. "Mrs. Wheeler, with all due respect, your medical records show significant cognitive impairment. Your memory of events may not be reliable." Jake pulled out his camera and showed them the photos of the journal pages. "What about Harrison Blackwood's memory? Is that reliable enough for you?" The color drained from Michael's face as he recognized the handwriting. "Where did you get that?" Your mother remembered where she and Duke had taken shelter. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Michael's composure finally cracked. You don't understand. My mother's condition was destroying everything our family built. She was going to ruin us all with her episodes. I was protecting the business, protecting our employees, protecting yourself, Margaret said quietly. You were protecting yourself, Michael, from embarrassment, from inconvenience, from having to actually take care of the woman who spent 52 years taking care of you. The second lawyer was whispering urgently in Michael's ear, clearly advising him to stop talking. But Michael seemed unable to stop the words from pouring out. Do you have any idea what's at stake here? The Goldman deal alone is worth $300 million. The jobs, the expansion, the future of the company, all of it was threatened by your condition. So you decided to solve the problem by committing elder abuse, Jake said flatly. I wasn't going to let her. Michael caught himself, but the damage was done. Dr. Rodriguez had been recording the conversation on her phone following hospital protocol for suspected abuse cases. Now she looked at Michael with disgust. Mr. Wheeler, I think you should leave. Now. But before Michael could respond, Sarah Chen walked into the room, her press credentials visible and her phone already recording. Mr. Wheeler, Sarah Chen, Arizona Tribune. Would you care to comment on the allegations that you abandoned your mother in the desert and attempted to cover up financial crimes within your company? Michael's lawyers immediately moved to shield him, but Sarah was experienced enough to keep talking. We have documentation of fraudulent business practices, witness testimony about the abandonment, and evidence that you deliberately sabotaged your mother's ability to call for help. How do you respond to these accusations? No comment. One of the lawyers said quickly. My client has nothing to say, but Michael, his careful facade finally crumbling completely, turned to Margaret with something that might have been genuine remorse. Mother, I never meant for you to be hurt. I thought someone would find you within hours. I thought you'd be taken to a real facility, properly cared for. I never wanted you to suffer. Margaret looked at her son, really looked at him. And for a moment, Jake saw the mother she had always been. Despite everything, Michael, she said softly, suffering isn't just physical. Do you have any idea how it felt to realize that my own child, the boy I raised and loved and sacrificed for, thought I was so worthless that I could be thrown away like garbage? Michael's face crumpled, but before he could respond, one of his lawyers was pulling him toward the door. We're leaving now. As they departed, Sarah was already on her phone with her editor. I've got everything. Photos, recordings, witness testimony. This story breaks tonight. Jake looked down at Duke, who had remained alert and protective throughout the entire confrontation. Good boy, he said quietly. You kept your promise. Margaret reached down to stroke Duke's head. Her movements gentle, but her eyes still bright with anger and hurt. What happens now? She asked. Now, Sarah said, putting away her phone, the whole world learns what Michael Wheeler is really like, and you get the care and respect you deserve. But even as Sarah spoke confidently about justice and exposure, Michael Wheeler was already implementing his escape plan. By the time her story hit the internet that evening, he would be on a private jet to a country with no extradition treaty, carrying millions in offshore accounts and leaving behind a trail of legal and financial chaos. The question was whether they could expose his crimes fast enough to prevent him from disappearing forever, taking his stolen fortune with him and leaving his victims, including his own mother, to deal with the wreckage of his ambition. Duke seemed to sense that the danger wasn't over. His amber eyes remained fixed on the window, watching the parking lot where Michael's Mercedes had been, his protective instincts telling him that the man who had betrayed Margaret once would try again if given the chance. The final confrontation was still to come, and it would test the bonds of family, loyalty and justice in ways none of them could have imagined. Sarah's story broke at exactly 6 p.m. Mountain Time, just as the evening news cycle was beginning. The headline read, "Phoenix business heir abandons mother with dementia in desert. Flees with millions." Within hours, the story had been picked up by national news networks, and Michael Wheeler's carefully constructed world began crashing down around him. At Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, Michael was already through security when his phone began buzzing with calls from reporters, business partners, and investigators. He ignored them all, focusing on the departure board that showed his flight to Grand Cayman leaving in 20 minutes. Once there, he could disappear into a network of offshore accounts and shell companies that would make him virtually untraceable. But Michael had underestimated the power of Duke's loyalty and Jake's determination. While Sarah's story was making headlines, Jake had been working with FBI financial crimes investigators, providing them with the photographs of Harrison Blackwood's journal. The evidence was so damning that federal agents were already moving to freeze Wheeler Enterprises' assets and issue warrants for both Michael and Harrison's arrest. At the same time, Margaret was giving her testimony to Adult Protective Services and local police, her statement clear and damning despite her dementia diagnosis. Duke sat beside her throughout the entire process, his presence seeming to strengthen her resolve and clarity. "My son calculated that my condition would make me an unreliable witness," Margaret told the investigators. What he didn't calculate was that there would be others willing to stand up for the truth. The first breakthrough came when Harrison Blackwood, panicked by the media attention and facing federal charges, decided to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a plea deal. His confession detailed years of financial manipulation, tax evasion, and fraudulent business practices that Michael had orchestrated. The second breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Hansen, Margaret's personal physician for over 15 years, had been growing increasingly concerned about Michael's handling of his mother's care. When she saw Sarah's story, she came forward with medical records that proved Margaret's condition was nowhere near as severe as Michael had claimed. While she did have early-stage dementia, she was still competent to make her own medical decisions and certainly didn't require the level of protective isolation Michael had imposed. But the most dramatic moment came when airport security, acting on a federal request, detained Michael at his departure gate just minutes before his flight was scheduled to leave. The scene was captured by airport security cameras and later broadcast nationwide. Michael Wheeler, once one of Arizona's most prominent businessmen, being led away in handcuffs, while other passengers watched in stunned silence. His carry-on bag contained over $2 million in bearer bonds and cryptocurrency access codes, evidence of his planned disappearance that would only strengthen the federal case against him. Back at Flagstaff Medical, Margaret was watching the arrest coverage on the waiting room television when Jake approached her with news that would change everything. "Mrs. Wheeler, I just spoke with your attorney. The FBI has recovered most of the stolen funds, and the court has appointed a guardian to protect your interests while you decide what you want to do about the company." Margaret turned away from the television, where her son was being perp-walked across the airport terminal. For a moment, Jake saw not the confused elderly woman he'd found in the desert, but the sharp-minded businesswoman who had built an empire alongside her husband. "What I want," she said quietly, "is to make sure this never happens to anyone else. I want to turn Wheeler Enterprises into a foundation, something that actually helps families dealing with dementia instead of destroying them." Duke, who had been lying quietly at Margaret's feet, raised his head and seemed to approve of her decision with a gentle tail wag. 3 months later, the Margaret Wheeler Foundation for Dementia Care held its first board meeting in the renovated Wheeler Enterprises building. Margaret, now properly medicated and living in a beautiful assisted living facility that actually specialized in dementia care, served as chairwoman emeritus. Jake Martinez had been hired as the foundation's chief photographer. documenting their work with families affected by dementia. Sarah Chen won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative reporting on the Wheeler case, which had prompted a nationwide examination of elder abuse and corporate corruption. Her acceptance speech included a special thanks to a loyal German shepherd named Duke, who proved that sometimes the most important witnesses are the ones who can't speak for themselves. Duke himself had found a new purpose. After Margaret moved to the assisted living facility, where pets were not only welcome but encouraged, Duke began training as a therapy dog. His gentle nature and protective instincts made him perfect for working with other dementia patients, and his story inspired a new program that paired rescue dogs with elderly residents. Michael Wheeler was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for elder abuse, financial fraud, and tax evasion. Harrison Blackwood received 8 years but was released after 5 for his cooperation. During his sentencing hearing, Michael finally offered a genuine apology to his mother, though Margaret chose not to attend the proceeding. "I've spent enough years of my life on Michael's poor choices," she told Jake. "I'd rather spend what time I have left focusing on the good we can do." The most remarkable change was in Margaret herself. With proper medical care, a stable environment, and the knowledge that Duke was safe and happy, her condition stabilized significantly. While she still had difficult days, she also had periods of remarkable clarity where she could review foundation business, meet with families, and share her story to help others. On a warm Arizona evening, exactly 1 year after the desert abandonment, Margaret and Duke sat together in the courtyard of the assisted living facility, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and red. Jake was there too, editing photos for the Foundation's annual report, while Sarah worked on a follow-up story about the positive changes that had emerged from the Wheeler scandal. "You know," Margaret said, scratching behind Duke's ears, "I used to think that Michael's betrayal was the worst thing that could have happened to me." "And now?" Jake asked, looking up from his laptop. Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her face and revealing glimpses of the formidable woman she'd always been. "Now I think it might have been the best thing. It showed me who I really was underneath all the confusion and fear. It brought me Duke and Jake and Sarah and all the families we're able to help now. Sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest destinations." Duke seemed to agree, settling more comfortably against Margaret's leg with a contented sigh. His vigil was over, but his devotion remained as strong as ever. As the stars appeared in the desert sky, Margaret looked up at them with wonder. "You know, I spent so many years afraid of forgetting things, afraid of losing my memories, but I've learned that some things are more important than memory. Love, loyalty, courage, those things live in the heart, not the mind, and hearts don't forget." Sarah looked up from her notebook, where she had been scribbling notes for her story. "Mrs. Wheeler, that's beautiful. Would you mind if I used that quote?" "Of course, dear, but make sure you mention Duke. He's the real hero of this story." Duke's tail thumped against the ground at the sound of his name, his amber eyes bright with contentment. He had kept his promise to protect Margaret, had led her through the darkest valley to safety, and had helped her find a new purpose that would honor the loyalty they shared. Dear listeners, we hope that Margaret and Duke's incredible journey of survival, betrayal, and ultimate redemption has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. This story reminds us that true family isn't always about blood relations. Sometimes it's about the souls who stand by us when everything else falls away, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. If this tale of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and her faithful companion has moved you, we have prepared a very special playlist of equally powerful stories about the extraordinary connections between humans and their beloved animals. You can find it by clicking the link to your left, where stories of devotion, healing, and unconditional love await you. Margaret Wheeler's Foundation continues to help families dealing with dementia, proving that even our darkest moments can bloom into something beautiful. Duke still serves as a therapy dog, bringing comfort to those who need it most, just as he brought hope to Margaret in the desert. If you enjoyed following Margaret and Duke's incredible journey from abandonment to triumph, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you stories that explore the depths of human emotion, the power of loyalty, and the amazing capacity for redemption that lives within us all. Share your thoughts about Margaret and Duke's story in the comments below. We love hearing how these tales touch your lives, and don't miss our upcoming stories that continue to celebrate the remarkable bonds that define our humanity. Until next time, remember that every ending is also a beginning, and every act of kindness creates ripples that can change the world. We'll be here waiting for you with more unforgettable stories that remind us why love, in all its forms, is the greatest force in the universe.